Welcome everyone, Otto here. So today I want to talk about a Java testing framework called ZeroCode. I want to give you a high-level overview first, talk about how the framework simplifies testing, and after that we will get our hands dirty and write some code. Okay, so what our typical application architecture might look like. We might have an API gateway here, which gets the requests from external sources. Behind that gateway, we would have microservices, and let's say we have one microservice that can speak REST. So from the testing perspective, if we want to test this microservice, our testing tool should support REST API testing, right? In a typical scenario, we also have a database. So if we want to support testing of database, we also need our tool to support database testing. And it really depends on the architecture, but you might have another microservice that speaks SOAP, and it might eventually use Kafka cluster. So we should have support for SOAP and Kafka. So there is a lot, and let's actually write them down. So we want API testing, REST and SOAP, right? REST and SOAP. We also want DB testing. We want Kafka testing, performance testing, security testing, and many other types of testing. And obviously there are tools for each one of them. For example, API testing, you can use JUnit, Rest Assured, even Postman. For DB testing, you can use DBUnit in Java. So there are many tools, but you can see that it will be really hard if we use all of them in our project, because firstly you need to learn all of them, then maintain, update their versions. It also increases the project size and so on. So wouldn't it be nice if we just have one tool to do them all, right? One framework to sort of rule them all? And the answer is yes, we can have it. And this is where ZeroCode comes into the picture. ZeroCode can take care all these different types of testing. And really quick, let me show you the project's official GitHub repo. I will have this link in the description, obviously. So in the About section, it says that it is a testing framework, and it can support REST, SOAP, database, Kafka, security, and there are many things that are not listed here. So it definitely worth to check this out. So I highly recommend to check it out. ZeroCode uses BDD approach. BDD stands for behavior-driven development, right? In BDD, we have user stories, and user stories can represent, for example, a feature that we want to implement in our application. It has scenarios, and each scenario has different steps, right? In this case, I've listed two, but in real world, you will have many steps and many scenarios in general. And the steps are the actual things that we want to make, right? So steps are the building blocks of scenarios, and scenarios are building blocks of user stories. And ZeroCode has the similar architecture. So in ZeroCode, we also have a scenario. For example, this is a prototype. It's not a working code. For example, we might have a scenario of, let's say, customer operations, and we might have 3 steps here: create, update, get account by ID. And I don't know if you noticed, but we didn't write the actual code. This is because ZeroCode uses declarative style of testing, and in declarative style of testing we focus on what to do. So this is really important. We focus on what to do, not how to do it. We supply this JSON or YAML scenario file, and the framework will translate that into the code. So that's why, by the way, the name ZeroCode, it's not symbolic. It emphasizes that we don't need to write the actual testing code. Framework will take care of that. Let's start using ZeroCode with REST API testing, because it is very popular to test REST APIs. But before we test the REST API, we should have a REST API. Don't you agree? So because of this, I made a Spring Boot application. This is the main sort of class. I have a very simple book controller, and I have some methods for insert, get the book, delete the book. So typical operations on the books. I don't use database in this section. I store the books in memory in array list. We will bring up DB in the next section. My book class looks like this. We have ISBN, which is a unique identifier of the book, title, authors, publication, date. Okay, let's actually start the app in the debug mode. And I will also have this project in the description, the GitHub link. If you don't know Spring Boot, it's not a problem. All you need to know is that we have a REST controller and we have a server that is run on port 8080. So this is the default port that Spring Boot uses. So if we go here and type localhost 8080 API books all, we get this empty object. So API books all. It invokes our controller because the patterns match API books. Now we need to match the keyword all. It matches here, and it invokes this method get all, and it returns the books. Since we don't have any books, that's why it returns an empty object, right? So this is the basic flow. So let's now actually start testing. But before we start using ZeroCode, we need to import it as a Maven dependency. How can we do it? We can go to the official GitHub page. If we scroll down, we will see here latest release, and if I click it, it forwards me to Maven Central, and on the right hand side I will copy this dependency and I'll just copy it here. It should be automatically picked up by Maven, but if Maven for some reason doesn't pick it up, you can always click here on the right hand side, Maven dependencies, and click this reload button, and the Maven will reload. Okay, all right. Now we brought up this dependency. We don't have any problems. Let's start writing the tests. So this is the typical Maven folder structure. You have you write your Java code here, you write your test codes here. So test, Java, and package name. Let's create a test class. Since we are testing book controller, I will say book controller tests. Okay, book controller tests. And by the way, ZeroCode uses a JUnit behind the scenes. So we will have a method here which will be invoked as JUnit test. I will call it test book, I don't know, book endpoints here, and we annotate it with a test annotation. This comes from JUnit, so it will eventually be run as a JUnit test, right? But we don't write anything in the method body. As I told you guys, ZeroCode uses a BDD approach where scenario is in the central place. Okay, so we need to write scenario, but where are we supposed to write these scenario files? And scenario is a typical file, JSON or YAML file. But we don't write it here. This is where Java classes go. For that, we create a separate folder. So I'll create a folder called resources. Make sure that this name is similar. So click this. These are the resources, and here goes our scenario files. So this is a typical place where we put our JSON and YAML scenario files. Okay, so I'll create a subfolder here. I will call it book scenarios. Okay, and let's create a scenario. Let's create it. So new file. I'll call it book APIs JSON. Okay, so this will be our scenario file, JSON file. ZeroCode can support YAML also. If you want to use YAML, go ahead. I'll be using JSON in this video. But before we implement it, let's actually finish writing this method, test method. And we need to specify which scenario we want to run. And ZeroCode has an annotation here called scenario, but we should also specify the location of the scenario. So we say book scenarios. So this should be the package name inside the resources folder. You don't need to type resources, but anything inside this. So book scenarios. So book scenarios, and I should not misspell it. Slash book API, book APIs.json. Okay, so book scenarios, book API JSON. We don't need to specify the resources folder. All right, that's all good. So our ZeroCode knows which scenario to run. But as I told you, ZeroCode can support many different types of testing, well, including REST API testing. So how should it know what kind of testing we are doing? We need to somehow specify it, right? And we specify it with annotation, which basically comes from JUnit. And again, ZeroCode uses JUnit. And here we specify ZeroCode class called ZeroCode unit runner dot class. So unit runner can support testing REST APIs, right? If I was, let's say, trying to test Kafka, there is also, if I'm not mistaken, Kafka testing. So Kafka client, Kafka builder. So you can definitely use that. But now I'm using ZeroCode unit runner class here. And we also need to specify our host information, because how does ZeroCode knows where our REST endpoints are? What is the port? What is the IP? So of course it doesn't know magically. We need to tell him, right? So I will just create a new file, which I will call host.properties. Okay, and this file we need to specify some of the properties of our REST API. So we'll have RESTful application, and you can obviously check out the exact syntax on the GitHub page. This is the syntax that it uses. HTTP. In this case, we are running our several localhosts, so I will have localhost here. Let me copy this. We need to specify the port. Port is 8080, and we need to specify the context. In this case, I will put it API. Why is that? Because our controller is invoked when we type API books, right? So the API is the general name, right? We might have API movies, right? Or API cars /cars. So anything more than books, right? So that's why I wrote API here, because I want to keep it generic, not tie this to only book controller. Okay. So this is the host property file. So we need to tell ZeroCode, hey ZeroCode, please go ahead and use this host property when running this test. So there is a target env annotation, and I will say host dot properties. Okay. So in this class, I think we are all done. Keep in mind that we don't actually write the testing code. We just write the scenario and the framework will translate it into the code. So this was just some metadata about which scenario to run, which ZeroCode class to use to run this test, and what environment to use to run our test against, right? We specify REST API information, the host property context. But the main thing happens in scenario file. So let's actually write something in our scenario. Okay, so this is a JSON object. It can be YAML, as I told you guys. I will have, so first thing to have is scenario name. And again, you can check out these gory details about the syntax and the keywords in the official documentation. So scenario file and scenario name, and I'll call it, I don't know, anything you want really. Call test book endpoints, something like that. And we have some steps. An array, we might have multiple steps, and each step is represented as a JSON object. Okay, what should be the first step? Let's actually, which method to invoke? Let's actually invoke this insert method, right? So I'll go here. So steps have names also. I will say create a book. Now we want to specify URL, right? We specify /books, right? Now why is that? First of all, when these steps are run, it is run from this Java class, right? Because we specify this scenario here, right? And this Java class uses these properties, host properties. So we don't need to specify the full URL here, because when we are running this scenario, it knows which host properties to use. In this case, we use these host properties, right? So when I specify here /books, behind the scenes, ZeroCode goes here, grabs this, right? Let me grab it here, grabs this. It specifies the port 8080, it specifies the context API, and it adds anything that is specified here. So we kind of write relative paths here. So it will add books, not with double slash, of course. So API books, and this method here is invoked when we have API /books, right? So this is something to keep in mind. I'll delete this. We don't write the full URLs here, we write relative URLs. Okay, so books. Now we need to specify the HTTP method that we want to use. Method, and the names, the keywords are very intuitive. In this case, we want post, not get. Okay, we now need to specify the request, right? Because we want to pass some request. This is a post request, creating a book. So let's actually create a book. But if we want it, it's not mandatory in this case. If we want it, we could specify headers. So we'll say headers. And let's say content type. So anything you could put in HTTP headers, you could do it here. I will say application /JSON. Okay. It's not mandatory here. I'll just showing you how you can put some attributes in the header. And we have a body here, the request body. We want title. And so what should we create? Which book? So I'll actually write think and grow rich. So this is the book I'm reading right now. I hope it will work sometime soon. Authors. Now we have one author here, and it is an array. Generally you will have many authors, but we have one here, and it is Napoleon Hill. Napoleon. Okay. The authors and publication date. Publication date, and it seems that I have a typo here. Publication date, and we need to specify a string here because the API expects a string, and I'll just write 1937. So this book was published 1937, but I don't know the exact month and day, so we assume that it was published on 1st of January. Okay, I think we are done with our request. So we specified the URL, we specified the method, we specified the body, and the framework knows which host properties to use. That's why we specify the relative URL here. Now it's time for assertions, right? When the framework will make this request for us, we need to assert a couple of things. So here comes assertions. Firstly, what do we want to assert? Let me actually close these guys, and let me open these. I will say split vertically, so we have both of them at the same time. So we are invoking this insert method, right? And what it does, it sets a unique identifier, it adds the book into our books list, and it returns the book, newly created book, with HTTP status created, and it is with the value of 201. Okay, let's actually assert the status first. Let's say assertions status equals 201, 201, not 20. And now what we can assert is the body. We can assert the response body, and I will just say body 2 dots, and well, basically it will have a same thing, same fields that we pass with just ID added. So I'll just copy this. And it should work, I think. Okay, we are done with this step. We have our request here, and we have our assertions here. Okay, let me close this. Let's actually run the test, right? See these green triangles. So I'll run this here. And the ZeroCode has a extensive logging, by the way. It logs everything on the console, and for some reason our test fails. Now why is that? Let's find out. So no such host is known because I have a typo. Let's go and check this. Localhost. See, this is the indication that the framework is using our host property file. Let's run it again. Hope that I don't have any typos. That's why it's always good that framework has good logging, because if something wrong, you can check it out. And as you can see, the test passed, right? And it logs everything. It logs what was the URL, what was the request, and most importantly, it logs the response from the server. It logs the headers, it logs the body. And as you can see, this ISBN 36 length ID is specified here in ISBN field because we set this ID here. Okay, and it also says that this was the expected response, which we matched, right? So the test passed, everything is good. I want to show you that in this target folder, ZeroCode has some logs. So for example, if we go to this logs folder, and here it has logs aggregated in this text file. So if you want to check out the logs in a separate file, you can come here. And what I like the most is if I go to show in Explorer, so this brings up this project in my file system. If I go to target, let's actually open this. What is this? This is a nice looking UI which describes tests. Now we ran one test but 2 times. Okay, that's why it says now on the left hand side we have tests, on the right hand side we have steps. So tests here, steps here. So one test passed and one test failed, because the first one, when I missed the localhost, it failed, and the next invocation passed. And you can see the name of scenarios. Okay, on the right hand side we have steps, and we say that this create book step passed. Okay, so this is a nice looking UI. Of course, there is a lot of more to that I showed you guys, but it's a good start. Okay, so ZeroCode also has some CSV report here and a JSON representation of our scenario and the result, so you can check it out here. Okay, so it has really extensive logging to find out if something is wrong